Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar organized by the Belgian Foreign Trade Agency and its partner Flanders Investment and Trade, 𝗬𝗶𝗃, hub.brussels, and the FPS Foreign Affairs. This webinar takes place on the occasion of the release of the study Belgian Exporters and Free Trade Agreements, a Good Match. We are happy to have such a diverse public joining in, coming from almost every corner of the world, but also diverse in the sense that we can welcome both companies and public officials. We have a charged agenda for the coming hour, but allow me just to quickly run through a few frequently asked questions. First of all the slides of the speakers and the study will be made available after this webinar. You'll receive them by email and they will also be published on our website. The webinar is recorded and will be uploaded on our website as well. This webinar will end with a Q&A. In case you have a question for a speaker, you can put it in the Q&A with the name of the speaker you would like to address it to. In case your question will not be covered during the webinar, we will certainly answer you at a later stage. To kick off the webinar, I have the pleasure to introduce Mr. 𝗕𝗃𝗿𝗄𝗏, who is Director EU Trade Policy and WTO as the FPS Foreign Affairs. He will make the opening remarks of the webinar. Mr. 𝗕𝗃𝗿, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank the Belgian Foreign Trade Agency for organizing this webinar and for giving me the chance to participate. I would also like to congratulate the agency for the excellent study that they produced on the implementation of free trade agreements. This study is of fundamental importance. As all of you know, trade agreements take a very long time to be negotiated. This is because of their complexity in terms of elimination of tariff barriers, but also in the elimination of non-tariff barriers. It is when the agreement enters into force that the implementation work begins. The complexity of trade agreements and also the implementation on the ground of new legislation therefore need a serious work of communication and explanation. It is not to this audience that I'm addressing today that I should stress the importance of these agreements. They cover 1/3 of all the imports and exports of the European Union. Furthermore, 90% of all world growth will take place outside of the European Union in the coming years. And let's not forget, in Belgium, 1 out of 5 jobs depend on trade. All this demonstrates the importance for our companies in general, but also in particularly for our small and medium-sized enterprises to use the full potential of these agreements. The agency study sheds light on the countries and sectors on which Belgium should focus its attention in the coming years. For instance, customs duties unduly paid by Belgian exporters amounted to more than 130 million euros in 2019. This is barely less than our total annual exports to Bosnia and Albania combined. So this deserves a closer look at what needs to be improved. The reduction of tariffs is an obvious advantage, but let's not forget the trade rules, the remedies for disputes, or the provisions on the level playing field. Also, we tend to focus on the advantages for exporters, but let's not forget the advantages for cheaper imports that ultimately make our exports more competitive. This is even more important as Belgium is primarily a transformative economy. The study reveals that one of the main reasons invoked for not using trade agreements is the lack of information. My first message to all of you today is to contact your Belgian trade promotion organizations if you need more information. Tailor-made solutions are possible with a geographical or thematic focus, but it's up to you to communicate what you need. The second message today is to have a full reading of the free trade agreements. The parts on labor or environmental standards matter. They level the playing field for you. For Belgium, the enforcement of provisions on sustainable development in our partner countries is a top priority. The third message that I want to give is that free trade agreements are work in progress. A follow-up is foreseen in the agreements through different committees. Don't wait, but act timely. The implementation of free trade agreements is a partnership between different levels of governance. The regional, federal, and European level work hand in hand. The Europeanization of trade promotion makes that the group of other companies that face the same difficulty expands considerably. I understand for an SME, this might sound like a lot of work, but a little effort to contact the trade promotion organizations or the European help desks might make the difference between a potential export market or not. It is thanks to the reactions received from companies on the ground that the European Union has taken action against trade barriers taken by third countries. I'm thinking in particularly on a symbolic product for us, the well-known frozen Belgian fries. They're subject of unfair measures in various countries. Your European Commission is now fully engaged in persuading the third countries to stop these measures, which we consider to be not in line with trade rules. This action was only possible because we were informed by the sector. Finally, your feedback helps us to improve the use of existing and future trade agreement. It is thanks to this feedback that instruments such as access to markets, the rules of origin of self-assessment tool, or the streamlined single entry complaint mechanism have been implemented by the European Commission. It is also thanks to this feedback that we better understand why some companies prefer not to use custom duties reliefs and that they want to pay them. A better understanding should also allow us not only a better use of the existing trade agreements, but allows us as well to correct these loopholes in future trade agreements. I thank you very much for your attention and I wish you a fruitful discussion today.
Thank you, Mr. Van Giel, for those interesting remarks. Now, I would like to introduce Mrs. 𝗕𝗃𝗵𝗃, who is Project Manager Enterprise Europe Network and the new Brexit coordinator for Flanders Investment and Trade. In that role, she will take the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement as a test case for FTA implementation. Mrs. 𝗕𝗃𝗵𝗃, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is 𝗕𝗃𝗵𝗃 and I'm the Brexit coordinator at Flanders Investment and Trade. And I'm also responsible for the follow-up of the implementations of FTAs. Firstly, I would like to thank the Belgian Foreign Trade Agency for the work on this study and for organizing this webinar. At FIT, we have always been actively promoting new free trade agreements by, for example, organizing seminars, by making promotion in our newsletter, and by providing extensive market studies about these FTAs. Now, with the publication of the study, which will be presented today, we will be able to set up more targeted actions toward exporters who are potentially missing out some benefits of these free trade agreements. The study presented today explores the difficulties SMEs are facing with the correct implementation of FTAs. And that's why I would like to discuss the most recent free trade agreement the EU has concluded, the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So companies are struggling at this moment to put the rules of the new trade agreement into practice. And in the following months, I believe we will learn a lot about what the exact struggles for SMEs are to put such an agreement into practice. The short time span between the announcement and the provisional entry into force is an extra challenge for companies. As the UK is Belgium's fourth export market, it was important to conclude the FTA between the EU and the UK and thus avoiding a no-deal scenario and a hard Brexit. While the percentage of total exports that the UK market represents has been decreasing in the last few years, it remains an important market, especially for Flanders, which contributes to 85% of Belgian exports to the UK. If you could go to the next slide. The last-minute conclusion of the FTA with the UK is proving to be a big challenge, both for us as an organization and for our SMEs, especially on tariffs and rules of origin. While the media proclaimed there would be no tariffs, companies are scratching their heads when they find out there might be tariffs after all, more specifically for goods from third countries not substantially processed in the EU, or goods with complex and high number of components sourced from third countries. As a result, our Brexit help desk is mostly occupied with answering questions on rules of origin. That is why it is important that the UK has been included in the new Access to Market database of the European Commission. When the rules of origin are not applied correctly, or if they are not understood by companies and the necessary evidence is not provided when doing the customs declarations, companies will end up paying tariffs and thus missing out the advantage of the trade agreement. But on the positive side, Brexit also provides an opportunity for our SMEs. Those wanting to continue to export to the UK, but had never exported outside the EU before, they have been forced to learn about customs procedures and rules of origin. For those that succeed, this has removed an important barrier to expand to other countries outside the EU in the future. In principle, they have the knowledge to export to any other third country. On the other hand, for many small SMEs, this will be the end of their export adventures to the UK, or some companies will be reluctant to start exporting to the UK. So to conclude, the learning opportunity and challenge for us is how to make this all more comprehensible to SMEs. The combination of the experience of Brexit and the results of this study on untapped potential in implementation of FTAs gives us a target audience of SMEs to take to other third markets. And now, then I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. 𝗵𝗃𝗃. I'm now looking forward to the intervention of Mrs. 𝗕𝗵𝗋𝗶𝗵, who is Area Manager North America for AWEX. We will complement what we've just learned with another test case study, the CETA agreement. Mrs. 𝗕𝗋𝗋, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christelle. So I'm going to use here the 5 short minutes I have to give you an example on how AWEX deals with the implementation of European trade agreements. Since I was more specifically on the North American market, I'm going to illustrate here the case of Canada and CETA. So a number of actions were taken following the entry into force of CETA in September 2017. In order first to inform companies about CETA and the potential benefit they can have, to encourage them to seize the opportunities offered within this framework, and also to make them aware of the competitive advantage they can gain. Communication has been a very important aspect. It has involved information sessions that were organized in several cities in Wallonia. We also organized a seminar dedicated to the export of food products to Canada. This sector was chosen because it has benefited from a significant reduction in custom duties with the CETA. Also, on our webpage, several pages have been dedicated to CETA, its opportunities, and related information. Numerous articles were published about CETA in our newsletter, our LinkedIn account, together with tweets and posts on our Facebook pages. Also, specific emails were sent to exporters to Canada for important related information, such as the requirement to register for REX in order to benefit from the tariff reductions. Major economic missions have been organized to Canada since September 2017. In total 6, including, of course, the States visit that was the result of all the organizations involved in today's event, but also sectoral mission in the ICT sector, environment, and food. AWEX has also supported its partners in event and any effort related to CETA, including the Federation of Enterprises, CANCHAM, the Chamber of Commerce Belgium, Canada, and more recently, the Belgian Foreign Trade Agency concerning the study that is presented today. About this study, the next step will be to decide together, based on these findings, what actions should be taken to further improve the use of FTA among Belgian companies. So we can move to the next slide. Thank you. Work has also been done in monitoring the follow-up of the implementation. We conducted a survey among companies exporting to Canada in September 2018. That was 1 year after the CETA came into effect. And the goal was to understand how they were using CETA and the remaining obstacles. We have also set up a monitoring committee that gathers once a year. It is in charge of reporting to the government of Wallonia on the context of the agreement, the progress of our economic exchanges with Canada, and also to report trade barriers that companies still face. It is made up of representatives of the administrations, but also business federations that are the most concerned by the trade agreement. And the delegation Wallonia Brussels to the European Union is then in charge of the follow-up with the Belgian authorities, but also at the European level. We have also a webpage on our website where companies can report obstacles they face in any country. And this is, of course, on a confidential basis. The last initiatives that I would like to mention here is the working group for the Wallonia regions on trade policy that was established in 2018. It was initiated by our Minister President and the Minister in charge of Economy and Foreign Trade. This is a technical working group that meets on a regular basis in order first to identify the offensive and defensive economic interests of Wallonia in foreign trade agreement negotiations. It also provides an update on the current negotiation. And it is a place actually where we can provide inputs to the government in order for them, if needed, to adjust their position on the ongoing negotiations. So that's it for me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. Omo. I'm happy to introduce now Mr. Olivier Costa, Trade and Economic Counselor at the European Institution and International Organization for Brussels. He will address the promotion of FTAs, Belgian companies. Mrs. Costa, Mr. Costa, thank you. Mr. Costa, thank you for joining in.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. So on behalf of Brussels, I have the pleasure of saying a few words on initiatives by Belgian trade agencies, so namely FIT, AWEX, and 𝗔𝗲𝗄𝗏, of course, to better inform Belgian companies on free trade agreements. FIT, AWEX, and 𝗔𝗲𝗏 are what we call trade promotion organizations, in short, TPOs. Our role is mentioned in the name. It's about promotion of trade-related topics, and one of these topics is free trade agreements. So our aim is to inform Belgian companies on opportunities created by FTAs between the European Union and third countries, and really to promote those FTAs amongst Belgian companies, mostly SMEs, both importers and exporters. Up until now, the EU has negotiated 45 trade agreements under different formats and with different contents. 36 of those are considered as main agreements. The most recent one, you have heard a lot about it, it's the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, signed just before Christmas. Several more negotiation or ratification processes are ongoing, such as the one with Mercosur, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand. And if you are interested in up-to-date information on negotiation and the agreement already in force, feel free to have a look at the 𝗕𝗪𝗘𝗏 website, and this information is also mentioned in the BFTA study that we are discussing today. As TPOs, we really would like to encourage companies to make the best use of these FTAs and to fully understand the opportunities they represent for Belgian companies. As part of this, the regional trade agencies have organized seminars specifically dedicated to Belgian companies. And we have organized seminars on the agreement with Vietnam in 2016, then in Canada in 2017, on Japan in 2018, and after that, Singapore 2019. This has been done in conjunction with FPS Foreign Affairs. And in order to provide the best information, we benefited from the expertise and valuable support of DG Trade of the European Commission, among others, key persons who have negotiated the agreement. And we also have counted on the valuable support of embassies of the third countries. We believe these seminars provided Belgian companies with quality information and helped them navigate FTAs. Besides explanation on trade of goods and services, information has been provided on tariffs, custom procedures, rules of origin, public tenders, intellectual property, or when applicable, like in the CETA, as just mentioned by Yael, the REX registration. We organize seminar once agreements are mature, meaning when negotiations have been finalized and during the ratification process by the member states. We will continue to do so and to propose similar initiatives once other agreements under negotiation reach their final phase. I think, for instance, on the renewal agreement on Mexico that should be mature in fall 2021. Regarding Brexit, many information sessions have taken place since the withdrawal decision, both in Belgium and in the UK. Help desks have also been set up. Information has been provided by a range of Belgian authorities, such as the customs authorities or FPS economy. 2 weeks ago, we organized with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs a webinar for Belgian companies on the new Access to Markets platform. This tool, developed by the European Commission, acts as a trade assistant for European companies. It is web-based, user-friendly, and freely accessible. And I really would recommend all Belgian companies to go on the platform and make use of it. It's a very, very comprehensive tool and very useful once you want to internationalize. One of the sections of this tool is dedicated to free trade agreement. Dedicated sections on main FTAs like CETA with the UK, for instance, are proposed. Fact sheets and guides, relevant information, legal text, exporter stories are all available online. On this new online information access to markets portal, Belgian companies will have the possibility of directly reporting trade barriers to the Commission and submitting a complaint. This is quite new and very interesting to report any problem that you could face. So should you face any trade obstacles, do not hesitate to inform the European Commission through the dedicated section of the website, as well as informing the trade agencies. Belgian TPOs have developed an extensive network of trade commissioners abroad. This is quite unique. Belgium is in the leading role about this. Together, 90 trade commissioners are at your service, covering more than 150 countries in the world. In their role as facilitator, one of the field of activities they can help you with is FTAs. So do not hesitate to contact us. We are there at your service. And we have colleagues based in countries like UK, Canada, Japan, Singapore, and many other countries where FTAs have been negotiated with. The access to markets tools complement the support and assistance provided by our Belgian trade commissioners. Moreover, our colleagues in Brussels and abroad are also available for one-on-one meetings on these topics. Finally, Belgian TPOs are a member of the European Trade Promotion Organizations Association, in short, 𝗙𝗃𝗃. One of the objectives of this association is to cultivate a fruitful dialogue with the European Commission. European Commission, which is in charge of trade policy, so a topic of huge interest for Belgium and including the FTAs issues. This is also an opportunity for Belgium to highlight issues of concern for our companies, mostly SMEs, and help them to better make use of FTAs. So if you have any suggestion on how TPOs can better help you and other companies to use FTAs, please feel free to contact me as well as my colleague at the EU offices. So I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. And I would like to introduce my colleague, Olivier Costa, who is the author of the study, Belgian Exporters and Free Trade Agreements, a Good Match. He will go through the main findings. Walter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christelle, and good morning, everyone. In the next 20 minutes or so, we'll indeed run through the study and discover to what extent Belgian exporters use or don't use free trade agreements. As you all know, the European Union negotiates these free trade agreements on behalf of its member states. So as a result, Belgian companies have access to over 40 preferential agreements, as Olivier just mentioned, involving 78 partners, including the United Kingdom. You may have noticed that every time a major new FTA is concluded, there's a similar pattern that is displayed. We see communications about potential gains for companies, for sectors, for countries. And often this is including projections of increased EU exports of amounting to billions of euros. And even though the free trade agreements, and certainly those of the new generation, contain many chapters to enable more frictionless trade, the removal of import tariffs of goods remains a crucial part of every agreement in order to achieve those projected advantages. As Elke mentioned, Brexit brought the free trade agreements much closer to many Belgian companies of whom many traditionally only export within the European Union. It is now indeed clear to those businesses that having a free trade agreement does not automatically lead to zero import tariffs. They find out, and as Elke mentioned, often the hard way, that they have to undertake action in order to export under the preferential regime that is established, or as I will call it from now on, they have to undertake action in order to use the free trade agreements. Our study aims to find out exactly to what extent Belgian exporters are using those free trade agreements or not, and it subsequently tries to answer the question why this is the case. And with these insights, the goal is to enable FIT, AWEX, 𝗔𝗄𝗄𝗏 and Foreign Affairs to improve the competitiveness of our Belgian companies. Before going any further, allow me to emphasize just one thing in order to be certain that we're all on the same page here. The study investigates FTAs or the use of FTAs by Belgian exporters. So when those exporters are not using free trade agreements, import duties will have to be paid. But this will not have a direct monetary impact on our exporters. There's often some confusion about this, and this can lead for a part to the former United States president, who mentioned that following the trade war, Chinese companies were paying billions and billions of dollars to the American Treasury. The money was flowing into the American Treasury, that's certain, but it was not paid by Chinese exporters. It was paid by US importers. So in the same way, not using FTAs by Belgian exporters leads to import tariffs for their clients, not for the exporters themselves. So why then is it important to measure the utilization of FTAs by exporters? Well, if you make a parallel again with the trade war, in order to avoid those duties, American importers are increasingly looking for alternatives for Chinese products. In the same way, our Belgian companies are always in balance with other international competitors as well. So using free trade agreements to their fullest extent gives our exporters an edge. It gives them a competitiveness compared to those who cannot benefit from free trade agreements. And this will eventually lead to more export, more jobs, and more welfare in Belgium. The study consists of two parts. In the first part, we try to assess whether the Belgian exporters are making the most out of the opportunities provided by the FTAs. And the second part, we'll try to find the motives of Belgian exporters to use or not to use the free trade agreement. Let's have a look at the first part. In order to find out to what extent Belgian companies use free trade agreements, we analyzed an experimental data set, which was provided to us by the European Commission. In this data set, we could find information concerning 1 year, 2019, and concerning 30 importing countries. You may remember I said in the very beginning that we have agreements with over 70 partner countries. So the data set does not give a full picture. However, it contains by far the most important partners, leaving aside mostly countries like Andorra, Fiji, Iraq, or Comoros. Together, the 30 countries combined represent no less than 20% of the Belgian non-EU exports. To give you an idea, this represents a value of, and you see it on top of the slide, of around 22 billion euro. However, only 8.4 billion euro is eligible for preferential trade. The gap between this 22 billion and the 8.4 billion is for a small part because not all trade is liberalized under the free trade agreements, but it's mostly due to the fact that a large proportion of those products were already free of import tariffs before the free trade agreement was established. But it still means that in 2019, Belgian products worth 8.4 billion euro would have faced import tariffs without the free trade agreements in those 30 countries. Still a considerable amount of money, I would say. And those import tariffs would have costed the clients of Belgian exporters 569 million euro. In other words, the yearly potential duty savings, or the heightened competitiveness of Belgian companies thanks to the free trade agreements, is well over €500 million each year. We found that products worth 6.3 billion euro are indeed exported under the preferential regime, thus representing actual duty savings of 437 million euro. But it also means that Belgian products for a value of 2.1 billion euro were still facing import duties in 2019, even though this was not needed. And this represents 132 million euro in foregone duty savings, or lost competitiveness, as you could call it as well, every single year. The goal is now to find out where exactly the potential competitive gains, the competitive advantages are situated, and where exactly this potential is left unused. Because we would like to give the most tailored support possible to our companies. We try to do so by combining a country with a sector. So on the left table, we have the 31 combinations with the highest potential duty savings. You see, for example, that thanks to the agreement with Turkey, Belgian exporters of plastics and rubbers could save up to 39 million euro in 2019. So what those 31 combinations have in common is that they all have potential duty savings of over 5 million euro or more. On the table on the right-hand side, we did a similar exercise, but this time looking for foregone duty savings, so where the potential is least used. Here we found 26 combinations which have in common that at least 1 million euro of potential duty savings is foregone, so it's not used. For the remainder of the first part, we focus on those combinations, which will allow us to act as efficient as possible and focus on those companies that can use most guidance from 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and 𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗏. First, let's dive deeper into the potential duty savings. And we do this by scrutinizing those 31 combinations with the most potential competitive gains for our exporters. It is interesting to find that those 31 combinations can target 59% of all potential duty savings by Belgian exporters. It seemed safe to assume that there would be a clear link between the value of preference eligible exports and potential duty savings on the other hand. So on country level, this would mean that most potential duty savings would lie with the most important trading partners. And the fact that agreements with Turkey, South Korea, Egypt, Japan generate most potential duty savings confirms this hypothesis. A notable exception is Switzerland, where the upside potential of the agreements was rather limited compared to the eligible preferential export. The same hypothesis was also upheld on a sector level. So the chemical sector, which is, as you all know, by far the most important sector for or export sector for our country, it topped the list of most potential duty savings. It was maybe more surprising to find out that the foodstuff sector has the second most potential duty savings thanks to the FTAs. The sector accounts for 6% of total exports, but 17% of potential duty savings in our list of 31 combinations. Also, the base metal sector appears to be capable of taking strong advantage of the free trade agreements. Okay, so let's move on to the foregone duty savings. Here you can see once more the list of the 26 combinations that we analyzed further. And by focusing on those 26 combinations with over €1 million in foregone duty savings each, we can address no less than 2/3 of all the lost competitive advantage by Belgian exporters. This is good news as far as I'm concerned, because it means that substantial efficiency gains can be achieved with a very targeted approach. To analyze the data, we followed the same patterns as before, assuming there would be a link between the preference eligible trade exports and the foregone duty savings. Broadly speaking, this hypothesis is effective, but we see more frequent exceptions here. What is particularly striking is that Belgian exporters have an excessive amount of foregone duty savings in Japan. At the same time, the free trade agreement with Japan was brand new, so it's possible that this plays a very big part in the story, similar to the story 𝗘𝗺𝗽𝗃 just told about the EU-UK agreement. It will be interesting to track the evolution for the years to come. Other free trade agreements where Belgian exporters lose much of their competitive advantage when looking to the 26 combinations are South Korea, Turkey, Egypt, and Israel. When we shift towards a sector focus, we found that the chemical industry encounters most foregone duty savings. Some could argue that this does not come as a surprise, given the sheer size of the export sectors, while others find it rather odd, since the chemical sector generally consists out of large firms with the capacity to follow up on the necessary actions to comply with the regulations. Once more, it will be illuminating to monitor the evolution. Since the picture may be clouded, there was one combination that we saw, the export of the chemical sector to Japan, with foregone duty savings worth almost €90 million. So that was really topping this list. Another surprising finding was that the Belgian exporters of live animals and animal products are among those that are using the free trade agreements to the lowest extent. This is interesting precisely because these companies often oppose free trade agreements out of defensive concerns. They denounce increased competition from abroad, but at the same time, they are not making optimal use of those agreements in an offensive way as a means to become more competitive abroad themselves. Of course, and that is what some of you might probably think right now, it could still be possible that all of our exporting companies would like to make use of free trade agreements, but that the closed agreements are simply too demanding or too complex to comply. That's why we made a comparison with the EU average. And this showed that in general, Belgian companies take advantage of the FTAs to a similar extent as their European peers. However, there's one major exception to this rule. I earlier mentioned that it made sense that the free trade agreement with Japan is not yet fully utilized since it's new. But at the same time, the EU average is almost twice as well as Belgium's average. So that's remarkable. Secondly, when comparing Belgian performance with the EU performance, we also examined the 26 combinations where the foregone duty savings amounted to more than €1 million. And here it appears that for those specific combinations, Belgian exporters are indeed underperforming compared to their European competitors in many cases. But in fact, we can consider this good news, since it means that we have all the tools in our hands to improve the results of our Belgian exporters in those specific combinations, at least up to the level of the other EU countries. And this brings me to the second part of the study: how can we improve the results? The easiest way to find out is to get in touch with the companies that decide to use or not to use FTAs on a daily basis. So our partners FIT, AWEX, hub.brussels, and ourselves, we've sent an invitation to participate to a survey to Belgian exporters towards Egypt, Israel, Morocco, South Africa, and Mexico. These 5 countries were selected because we certainly wanted to reach companies that were not using free trade agreements. And according to the data that we had available at the time of the survey, those 5 countries had the highest foregone duty savings when importing Belgian products. In the end, we had 372 participants responding to the survey, of whom, as you can see on the slide, 80 used the free trade agreements, 185 companies did not, and 107 companies indicated they work with third parties, such as shipping agents, for export procedures. So what did we find? First of all, the size of companies seems to be a good predictor of how well a free trade agreement is used. In general, you can say that the bigger the company, the more likely it becomes to make use of a free trade agreement. It's not surprising, but it can serve as a reminder that policy focus should continue to go towards SMEs. We also found that a majority of the companies that are using free trade agreements do so because it makes their products more competitive. And a significant part, almost 2/3 of the companies using free trade agreements, perceive that being able to use those free trade agreements is of decisive importance for their export strategy. 19% of the companies noted that the free trade agreement is even so important that without its existence, they would stop exporting to the country involved. Nevertheless, only about half of the companies that are using free trade agreements mention that they actively play out the advantages of lower import duties in their selling proposition. So this was also remarkable. Probably one of the most counterintuitive findings was that most of the exporters using free trade agreements indicate that it's rather easy for them to prove the rules of origin. This is the case for as much as 73% of the companies. Even though the result is rather outspoken, the size of a company once more seems to have an impact in the sense that the largest companies are less likely to report problems than their smaller peers. Yet, also for the smaller companies, it is not that difficult because in a follow-up question, we found that bigger companies often point to a dedicated team to explain why proving the rules of origin is deemed easy, while smaller companies mention that they have shorter value chains or their products are maybe made in just one country. A last finding is that custom procedures are rarely a cause of concern, although problems may obviously always occur. In a group of companies not using free trade agreements, to little surprise, the smaller companies are overrepresented. Ambassador Van Geel mentioned it in its opening remark about half of the exporters that could make their products more competitive by using free trade agreements are not doing so because they indicate that they lack the proper information. This is by far the most quoted reason. So we should remember there can never be something as too much information to guide companies, and this is certainly true for the smaller ones. Maybe more surprising, the second reason for not using free trade agreements is basically making the deliberate choice of not doing so. About 1 out of 3 companies indicate that they have the required certificate of origin, or they say that they can easily obtain this, but they prefer to export under the most favored nation principle rather than through the free trade agreements. In a follow-up question, we found that the 2 most important reasons for this were rather straightforward. For most, those companies did not use free trade agreements because the importer was not requesting this. So why bother going through this administrative procedure as your client is making the purchase anyway? That's a logical way of thinking. And a second often mentioned reason is that companies are concerned about checks, misunderstandings, or border problems should they use a free trade agreement. We have, however, ammunition thanks to the survey to address both reasons, because we can now point out that the majority of Belgian exporters use free trade agreements, not because the importer asks them to do this, but because it makes themselves more competitive. And we may add that those companies claim it brings decisive advantage to their export. And as for the second motive, concerns about practical problems, we could point to the finding that problems at the border are in general not a striking issue for companies using free trade agreements. So apart from the lack of information and deliberate decision not to use free trade agreements, we found to a much lesser extent other reasons why exporters are not making use of the free trade agreements, such as not being eligible for preferential trade, problems at the border, or finding it too difficult to obtain a certificate of origin. And finally, we arrived to the last findings of the study. And these findings come from surveying companies that are basically producing the goods, but rely on third parties, such as shipping agents, for export procedures. No less than 30% of the companies participating to our survey indicated that they were in this situation. And again, to little surprise, the SMEs were overrepresented. It is striking that a vast majority, 81% of companies in this category, does not know whether they are actually making use of the free trade agreement or not, which in reality would mean that they most probably don't. By contrast, only 17% of companies working with a third party are certain to make use of free trade agreements. But this lack of knowledge about the matter does clearly not mean that exporters using third parties do not have an opinion about this issue. 63% of the exporters report that they believe it would be better for their company if they would have a free trade or if they would use a free trade agreement as an exporter. And 2/3 of the companies would probably make use of the FTAs, they say, if they would handle the export procedures themselves. So this gap between reality and fiction as is right now can be one of the most interesting findings of the paper. And it will be one of the items that deserves follow-up, because the study does not only clarify a few things, it also brings more questions and certainly would benefit from confirmation of certain findings over longer term. So together with my colleagues of FIT, AWEX, 𝗲𝗄𝗃 and Foreign Affairs, we're certainly invested in further developing this topic to better help our embassies and trade representatives abroad to identify the opportunities and missed opportunities in order for them to help our exporters excel. This was, in a nutshell, the study. Thank you.
Thank you for presenting the main conclusions, Walter. I think this reveals some interesting findings that we can certainly continue to explore together with our partners in the coming months or years. Finally, I'm very happy to introduce Mrs. 𝗕𝗲𝗍𝗲𝗵𝗿, Advisor for Implementation of EU Trade Agreements at DG Trade of the European Commission. She'll deliver the closing remarks to this seminar. Mrs. 𝗕𝗲𝗍𝗲𝗵𝗿, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me and see me. I want to thank very much the organizer of this event, the BFTA, and also I want to ask one second, please. Excuse me, the challenges of home office. I also want to thank Patrick van Geele for the opportunity that he provided 2 weeks ago for my boss, the CTO, Mr. 𝗕𝗍𝗽𝗍𝗍, to address the TPOs, but also companies on the important topic of enforcement and implementation of our trade agreements. As you know, trade agreements and trade in general has to make an important contribution to the recovery. We have a very, very serious situation, both at the international level, where last year trade went down by 9%, and EU exports went down by 13%. So, and this is a situation that weighs heavily on a country like Belgium that generates a lot of its GDP from exports to countries outside the EU. Actually, 1/3, if I'm not mistaken. Now, we have obviously launched our rescue package, the 750 billion, and Belgium has also taken very decisive steps, if I'm not mistaken, even amounting to 1/3 of its GDP in terms of rescue aid. Now, what else can be done more midterm and long term? And I think everybody is now looking towards the Commission, but also trade policy more generally, and how can we adjust to the challenges that SMEs are facing. Here, somebody mentioned already that we have 45, or meanwhile it's 46 agreements with the TCA with 78 partners, but it's not enough to have negotiated the agreements and to make them enter into force, to ratify them. It's very, very important to do something so that these benefits that we all hope will materialize actually materialize. And here, I think the appointment of the Chief Trade Enforcement Officer in July of last year couldn't have come more timely. And his main role, as he explained to you 2 weeks ago, is to minimize distortions and maximize benefits from these trade agreements. And we are in this together. So the European effort, the collective effort, has to extend not only to the other EU institutions, but also to member states, TPOs and businesses themselves. And somebody mentioned already that the feedback or the information that was fed in the 𝗵𝗄𝗃 case against Colombia to the Commission contributed in a major way to the steps that we are now taking at the EU level and at the WTO level to remedy these problems. We are also regularly reaching out in the market access working groups and in our partnership with member states in order to identify early these disruptions and address them. Somebody has said also earlier that information is one of the biggest hurdles. The lack of information on trade agreements is one of the biggest hurdles in the usage of these agreements, and I couldn't agree more. So we feel that information gaps and lack of information shouldn't constitute a barrier in itself to using these trade agreements. And hence our attempts with the Access to Markets tool that we launched last October to bridge this gap and to make sure that information about these trade agreements is applied in an understandable manner. However, again, we have set up the tool and we have presented it, but that doesn't stop there. So we need you, the member states and the TPOs to promote the tool and to translate certain features into the local context and to make sure that you members understand that the tool is available and they can use it. I was listening to Wouter, and I'm a big fan of his study, and I'm saying this because indeed, without knowing what the actual situation is, you can't find a way of improving it. So the BFTA study plays an important role. It's very welcome. It was supported or informed by data that the EU Commission made available and is still making available to all member states. And what I want to flag here is that we are trying to take this as a very good opportunity to also look more regularly into the reasons that could cause the poor use of preferences, or that, let me put it differently, ways of how we could help the companies to use the agreements. And only yesterday, we had a sectoral meeting on medical devices, and we have more this year in other sectors. So we very much applaud the study, and we hope that it will help us to make headway in using the preferences. I also want to say that I very, very much liked the word used by Patrick van Geel in the beginning, the Europeanization of trade promotion. So this is something I haven't heard in that form before, but it is clear that trade promotion organizations are important players and increasingly important players in the area of FTA implementation. So, and they are playing this role, and 𝗕𝗄𝗃 is a case in point. It's actually a very good effort that we applaud from the side of the Commission at the European level, in the EU, but also abroad. And before I came on this call, I was in a phone call with the EU delegation and the EU Japan Center and SME help desk. And that shows that the TPOs abroad, they make a very, very important contribution to the implementation of these agreements and to maximizing the benefits. And so my message here is to wish you a good continuation. We're taking very seriously and looking very closely at the position paper that you have shared with us and the proposals that you made. We're also trying to look at ways of further improving the interaction between the Commission, the delegation on the one hand, and the TPOs. And we are looking obviously at efficiency gains and scaling here. And one particular thing that I personally wish to see in the future is that TPOs share good practices and information among each other to a larger extent, and then also could cooperate, like it's happening now in Japan, could cooperate not only on a particular host country, but also on third countries in the region. So, so that is a very, very interesting field to be explored. And then obviously, as far as the Commission can help, we are very much ready to look into that. And yeah, but again, congratulations to your efforts, and we hope that we will work closely with you also in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this closing remark, Mrs. 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗃. And now it's Q&A time. So we'll start with the first question. First question from Mr. Rudy Mertens. Okay, Mr. Mertens addressed us the following questions. For the case of Singapore, we can conclude that the tariff reduction effect is minimal as tariffs are already low or non-existent. Can one of our speakers address this question? I think, Wouter, you can answer these questions.
Yeah, I think I can. Thank you for this question, and it's absolutely correct. The free trade agreement with Singapore was not yet considered since it was concluded only in 2019. But we've seen the same for the FTA of Canada, where a big chunk of the trade already was MFN0 before the free trade agreement was concluded, which means that for many products, as you know, no import tariffs were applied anyway. And for those products where the MFN rate was higher than 0, it was still not at high. So I absolutely agree with your statements. At the same time, free trade agreements are currently for about more than just lowering import tariffs, as you know. So if I'm not mistaken, this FTA was also about investment, procurement, intellectual property, and so on. So I think it's still a good effort.
Thank you, Wouter, for highlighting these questions. Well, another question for you, Wouter, so you can stay connected. Would it make sense to promote the FTAs more to the shipping companies, or would they only reply that it's up to their customer to use FTAs?
I think it would make perfect sense, at least to contact them, and that's also what we did. In fact, following the study, we noticed the big gap between what was actually taking place in reality and what companies hoped for. So I think it's also interesting for the shipping agents themselves to close this gap, because it would mean that they could deliver better service, even better service to their clients than they are already doing. In this short meeting I had with Forward Belgium, which is the umbrella organization of the shipping agents in Belgium, they indeed mentioned what you say. That's up to the client to do this. What they always take care of free trade agreements while importing, because in that at that moment our Belgian importer, our Belgian company, has a direct monetary impact. While for exporting, no, indeed, it's not that common yet. But we'll have more meetings with them in the future to find out whether we can collaborate on one way or another to augment this capacity.
Thank you, Wouter. I see it's now already 11. We have to close this webinar. There are some questions that were not answered during the webinar, but we will answer at a later stage. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your presence, for your participation at our webinar today. I wish you a pleasant reading of the study. Have a good day and bye-bye.